It is a mistake to suppose the struggle between Indra and Vitra originally represented a conflict between the thunder god and rain cloud. It is really a struggle between the power of light and darkness, and we find traces of it in the Aitareya Brahmana, where Indra alone of all gods is described of having undertaken the task of driving out Asuras from the darkness of the night. That Indra is the god of light is also evident from many other passages in Rig Veda, where, without any reference to the Vitra fight, Indra is said to have found the light in the darkness, or to have produced the dawn as well as the sun, or have opened the darkness with the dawn and the sun. It was he who made the sun to shine, and to mount the sky, or prepare a path for the sun, or found the sun in the darkness in which he resided. It's evident from these passages that Indra is the winner of light, and this character of his, as well as understood by scholars, for Indra was the recoverer of light, is compared by Max Mueller with Apollon in Greek mythology. Scholars have found it difficult to explain why this character of Indra should be mentioned in conjunction with the other exploits, such as the conquest of Vitra and liberation of waters. In fact, that is a real difficulty in the explanation of the legend, either by the storm or the dawn theories, as seen earlier. Indra liberated the waters and brought about the dawn by killing Vitra, undoubtedly the burden of the whole story, but no explanation has yet been found by which the simultaneous recovery of light and waters could satisfactorily be accounted for. We've seen that by the storm theory we can account for the release of waters, but not the recovery of the dawn. While, if the legend is taken to represent a struggle between light and darkness, as implied by the dawn theory, we can account for the recovery of the dawn and the sun, but not for the release of waters. Under these circumstances, it's necessary to examine the nature and character of waters as described in the Vedas before we accept or reject either or both of the above-mentioned theories. It has been noticed earlier that the passages where water is said to be released by Indra after killing Vitra do not refer expressly to the rain cloud. The words used are denoting a place where the waters were confined. Others, such as apa or sindhus, to denote the waters themselves. Now, apa or waters generally are mentioned in other places in the Rig Veda, and the word in many places denotes the celestial or aerial waters. Thus, we are told that they follow the path of the gods and are to be found beside the sun, who is with them. We also have an express statement that there are waters which are celestial, and also those that flow in earthly channels, thus clearly distinguishing between terrestrial and celestial waters. In the same verse, they are said to have the sea or ocean for their goal, and the 7 rivers are said to flow into the jaws of Varuna, as into a surging abyss. Varuna again is described as the god who, like Indra, makes rivers flow, as we've seen that the sage Durgatamas is said to have been born on the wanderers wending to their goal. It is needless to cite more authorities on this point, for scholars are agreed that both celestial and terrestrial waters are mentioned in Rig Veda. The nature, character, or the movements of celestial waters appear, however, to be very imperfectly understood, and this is the sole reason why scholars have not been able to connect the release of the waters with the recovery of the dawn in the Vitra legend. It seems to have been supposed that when Rig Veda speaks of celestial waters, only the rain waters are intended. This is a mistake, for in passages which speak of the creation of the world is said to have once consisted of nothing but undifferentiated waters. In short, Rig Veda, like the Hebrew Testament, expressly states that the world was originally full of waters, and that these were the waters in the firmament above and the waters below. The Shatipatha Brahmana, the Aitareya Upanishad, and Manu all say the world was created from watery vapors. There can therefore be no doubt that the idea of celestial waters was well known to ancestors of the Vedic bards in the early days, and as the celestial waters were conceived by the material out of which the universe was created, it's probable that the Vedic bards understood by that phrase what modern scientists now understand by ether, or nebulous mass of matter that fills up all the space of the universe. We need not, however, go so far. It is enough for our purpose to know that the celestial waters, or the watery vapors, are mentioned in Rig Veda, and that the Vedic bards considered the space, or the region above, below, and around them to be full of these celestial vapors, which are said to co-evolve with the world. It is, however, alleged by Wallace in his Cosmology of the Rig Veda that Vedic bards were not acquainted with the regions below the earth, and that everything which is described in the Vedas as occurring in the atmosphere, including the movements of the sun during the day and night, must be placed in the regions of the sky, which were over the head of the bards. This view appears to be adopted by MacDonald in his Vedic mythology, and if it be correct, we shall have to place all the waters in the upper heaven. But has Wallace correctly interpreted the passages quoted by Professor Zimmer in support of his theory that a region exists below the earth, and we cannot therefore accept Wallace's conclusion, which are evidently based on prepossessions derived most probably from the Homeric controversy? Professor Zimmer refers to 3 passages to prove that a region beneath the earth was known to the Vedic people. First of these passages is a well-known verse regarding the bright and the dark day. It says, "The bright day and the dark day both roll the 2 Rajas by the well-known paths." Here, the 2 Rajas are evidently the upper and lower celestial hemisphere, but Wallace asks us to compare this verse, where day and night are said to revolve like 2 wheels, that is, to circle around from east to west, the one rising as the other goes down, and observes that we are in no way obliged to consider the progress of either as continued below the earth. It is impossible to see how they could draw such inference from the passages. In the verse quoted by Zimmer, 2 Rajas or atmospheres are mentioned. The bright and the dark day are said to roll along both these regions. But if we hold with Wallace that the progress of either begins in the east and stops in the west, without going below the earth, the whole movement becomes confined to one region and does not extend over the 2. Zimmer's interpretation is therefore not only more probable, but the only one that explains the use of Rajasi in the dual, or in the 2 regions within the verse. The next passage is also misunderstood by Wallace. It describes the dawn as unrolling the 2 regions, which border on each other, revealing all things. Now, the dawn always appears on the horizon, and the 2 regions, which it unrolls, and which are said to border on each other, must meet on this horizon. They can therefore only represent the lower and upper celestial sphere. But Wallace would have us believe that both these regions are above the earth, and that narrowing down together towards east and west, they meet on the horizon, like 2 arched curves over one's head. The artificial character of this explanation is self-evident, and there is no reason why we should adopt it in preference to the simple and natural explanation of Zimmer, unless we start with a preconceived notion that references to these regions below the earth ought not to be and cannot be found in Rig Veda. Third passage pointed out by Zimmer says, "O Savitri, thou goest round the night on both sides." Here Wallace proposes to translate round as encompasseth, but it ordinarily means goest round, and there's no reason why the idea of motion, usually implied by it, should here be abandoned. It will thus be seen that the conclusion of Wallace is based on the distortion of passages which Zimmer interprets in a simpler and more natural way, and that Zimmer's view is more in accordance with the natural meaning of these texts. But if an express passage be still needed to prove conclusively that the region below the earth was known to Vedic bards, we can refer to the following. Where the bard prays for the destruction of his enemies and says, "Let him go down below the three earths." Here the region below the three earths is expressly mentioned. Since the enemy is to be condemned to it, it must be a region of torment and pain, like Hades. We also read, "One who injures me, let him be sent to the nether darkness." Comparing this with the last passage, it's evident that the region below the earth is conceived of as dark. And also the brood of Dasyu, whom Indra killed, is said to have been sent to the unknown netherworld. These passages directly show that the region below the earth was not only known to the Vedic bard, but conceived of as filled with darkness, and made the scene of Indra's fight with Vitra. It may, however, be alleged that below the three earths may simply mean underneath the surface of the earth, but in that case, it's not necessary to speak of all the three earths, and since we are told that the region is below all the three earths, it can refer only to the netherworld. This is further proved by the passage which describes what is above the three earths. The expression corresponding to the region below the three earths would be the region above the three earths, and as a matter of fact, the expression is also found in Rig Veda. Thus, we are told that the Ashvins, moving above the three earths, protect the vault or top of heaven through the days and nights, and Ashvins are said to have come on their car from a distant region in the preceding verse of the same hymn. The phrase, "the top of heaven," occurs several times in Rig Veda and means the top or the vaults of the heaven. Thus, the sun is said to guard the vault of the heaven, and as regards the threefold division of the earth, it is mentioned in several places in Rig Veda, and also in the Avesta. This threefold division is further extended. This shows what we are to understand by the three earths. It is the one and the same earth, regarded as threefold, since the Ashvins are described as protecting the vault of heaven by moving above the three earths, and it's clear that in contrast with the vault above, the nether region, as far below the three earths as heaven is above them, must have been conceived and denoted by the phrase, "below the three earths," and that the latter expression did not merely mean an interterrestrial ground. When we meet with two such phrases as the heaven above the three earths and the region below the three earths in Rig Veda, phrases which cannot be mistaken or misunderstood, the hypothesis that Vedic bards were not acquainted with the netherworld at once falls to the ground. Mr. Wallace seems to think that since rajas, or regions, is said to be divided threefold like the earth, and since the highest region is mentioned as the seat of waters, there's no scope in the Vedic tradition of regions for a region beneath the earth, for the three rajas are exhausted by taking them as the Raja of earth, the Raja of sky, and the highest rajas, the seat of waters. This objection is quite untenable inasmuch as 6 different rajas are also mentioned in Rig Veda. We can therefore suppose that there are 3 rajas above the earth and 3 below it, and so meet the apparent difficulty pointed out by Wallace. The 3 rajas in some places can also be interpreted to mean earthly rajas, the one above the earth and the one below it. The Savitri is described as moving through the dark rajas. In the next verse we are told that he comes from the distant region, which shows that the dark rajas and the Paravat region are synonymous, and that the sun ascends the sky after passing through the dark rajas. Again, the use of the word ascend to describe the rising of the sun in the morning from the ocean shows by contrast that the ocean, which the sun is said to enter at the time of setting, is really an ocean underneath the earth. The sun is described as sleeping in the lap of Niriti and dwelling in darkness. The sun is also said to have traveled the interior of the heaven and earth and finally gone to Niriti, or, as Professor Max Mueller renders it, the Exodus in the West. Now there are 3 Niritis mentioned, evidently corresponding to the 3 earths and the 3 heavens, and the lap of Niriti is identified as the region of death. Pururavas is again said to have gone to the distant region and have made his bed in the lap of Niriti, while the Maruts are described as mounting up the firmament from the bottomless Niriti. All these passages taken together show that Niriti, or the land of dissolution and death, commenced in the west, and that the sun, lying in darkness, traveled through the distant region and eventually rose in the east from the lap of Niriti, and the whole of this movement was placed not in the upper heaven, but on the other side of the vault through which the sun traveled before he entered into Niriti. In other words, Niriti extend below the earth from west to east, and since the region below the 3 earths, expressly mentioned in Rig Veda, the 3 Niritis must be understood to mean the 3 regions below the earth, corresponding to the threefold division of the earth or of the heaven above it. Zimmer is therefore correct in stating that the sun moved through the regions below the earth during the night, and the Vedic poets knew about these nether regions. There are other passages in the Rig Veda which fully support the same view. Thus, corresponding to Rajasi, or the 2 Rajas, we have another expression in the dual, namely the 2 halves, which applied to heaven, the 2 celestial hemispheres. The expression Ardhau occurs in the Rig Veda, and the 2 halves there are asked to be propitious to the sacrificer. Wallace, however, interprets the phrase to mean heaven and earth, but this is a mistake, for there is a passage in Rig Veda where we have the phrase in the further half and in the nearer half of heaven, showing that heaven alone, and not heaven and earth, was conceived as divided into 2 halves. A few verses later on, the cow and her calf, the dawn and the sun, described as having appeared below the upper and above the lower realm, that is, between heaven and earth. And a question is then asked, to what half has she departed? Which again shows that the half here referred to is quite distinct from heaven and earth. And in the Artha Veda, the 2 halves are referred to, and the poet asks, Prajapati, with 1 half, engendered all creation. What sign is there to tell us of the other half? Here the other half cannot mean the earth. Griffith accordingly explains it as referring to the sun at night. Another expression used to denote the upper and lower world is the 2 oceans. These 2 oceans are said to be one on this side and one on the other side, and the yonder ocean is mentioned in the Rig Veda. I've already quoted passages which speak of the bright ocean and of an ocean pervaded in darkness. The 2 words parastat and avastat are employed to convey the same idea. They denote a region on the nearer side and a region on the far side. Thus, the Pravat region is contrasted with Ambara, or the heaven above, and the sun is described as sleeping in the Parvat region. We've seen that Savitri is said to come up from the Paravat region, and that he moves through the dark region before ascending the sky. The 2 words, Paravat and Aravat, thus separately denote the same regions that are jointly denoted by the dual words. And when both the upper and lower hemispheres were intended, the word shone was employed. Thus we can read, O Maghavan, O brother Indra, go beyond and come hither, you are wanted in both places. The passages where Savitri is described as going round the night on both sides, we've already referred to. With these passages before us, we cannot reasonably hold that the Vedic bards were ignorant of the lower celestial hemisphere, as supposed by Wallace and some other scholars, nor is the hypothesis a priori probable, for we have shown elsewhere that the Vedic bards knew enough of astronomy to calculate the movements of the sun and the moon, tolerably correct for all practical purposes, and that the people who could do this could not be supposed to be ignorant as to believe that the sun was nailed down to the earth at the celestial horizon, and that when the sun was not seen during the night, it must be taken to have disappeared somewhere in the upper regions of the heaven. The passage from the Aitareya Brahmana, which is quoted by Wallace, which tells us that the sun, having reached the end of the day, turns round, as it were, and makes night where there was day before, and day on the other side, and vice versa, is very vague. It does not prove that the sun was believed to return by night through a region, which is somewhere in the upper heaven. The words used in the original are avastat and parastat, and Dr. Hogg correctly translates parastat by that which is on the other side. Muir and others, however, interpret parastat to mean upper, thus giving rise to the hypothesis that the sun returns during night by a passage through the upper regions of the heaven. But in the face of the express passages in which the regions below and above all the three earths are unmistakably mentioned, we cannot accept a hypothesis based on a doubtful translation of a single word. It is a hypothesis that has its origin either in a preconceived notion regarding primitive man or desire to import into the Vedas the speculations of the Homeric cosmography. Knowledge of the Vedic bards regarding the netherworld may not have been as exact as that of modern astronomers, and we, therefore, meet with such questions in the Rig Veda as, where is Surya now after sunset, and which celestial region his rays now illumine? There's enough explicit evidence to prove that Vedic people knew the existence of a region below the earth, and if some of their notions about this underworld were not very distinct, it does not in the least affect the value of this evidence. If we therefore dismiss from our mind the idea that the lower world was not known for the Vedic people, assumption which is quite gratuitous, the movements and character of the celestial water become at once plain and intelligible. The ancients, like the old Hebrews, believed that the subtle matter which filled the whole space in the universe was nothing but watery vapors. And secondly, the movements of the sun, the moon, and the other heavenly bodies were caused by these vapors, which kept on constantly circulating from the nether to the upper, and from the upper to the lower celestial hemisphere. That is the real key to the explanation of many Vedic myth, and unless we grasp it very thoroughly, we cannot rightly understand some of the utterances of the Vedic poets. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing to our videos. If you know anyone interested in this kind of content, please let them know. It sure helps us out a lot.